5,000 years ago, in the mountains of ancient China, a single leaf fell into a pot of boiling water and changed the course of human civilization forever. Legend says Emperor Shen Nong, the divine farmer, was boiling water under a wild tea tree when a breeze carried a few leaves into his pot. Intrigued by the fragrance, he took a sip. He described the feeling as if the liquid was investigating every part of his body. He named the brew "Si," the Chinese character meaning to check or investigate. He had just discovered tea. And in that single accidental moment, the world's second most consumed beverage, second only to water, was born. For over a millennium, tea was a fiercely guarded secret of the Chinese elite. It was medicine. It was philosophy. It was a symbol of refinement and power. But within the next 3 centuries, this elixir of life from China would become the most powerful drink the world had ever seen, generating billions of dollars every single year and redrawing the map of the globe. But the journey from an ancient Chinese secret to the humble tea bag in your kitchen is one of the strangest, bloodiest, and most unlikely stories in human history. Tea didn't just refresh people. It funded wars, built empires, fueled revolutions, and created a modern global economy built on the backs of millions of workers whose stories are almost never told. The secret of the sacred leaf. To understand where tea came from, we have to go back nearly 5,000 years. But forget the quaint image of an English afternoon tea party. The real story begins in southwestern China, where the Camellia sinensis plant grew wild in the ancient primeval jungles that covered what is now Thailand, Myanmar, Yunnan, northern Vietnam, and India. All true teas, from delicate white tea to robust black tea, come from this single species of evergreen shrub. The differences in flavor arise entirely from how the leaf is processed after it is picked. The mythical Emperor Shen Nong may or may not have discovered tea by accident. The more likely reality is that indigenous tribes discovered the invigorating properties of the plant thousands of years earlier. But the Shen Nong legend marks a crucial moment in history, the point where tea's use became recognized by the wealthy and powerful classes. Its properties were documented. Its usage began to spread. We know that by the Han Dynasty, 206 to 220 AD, tea was already an established part of Chinese culture. Tea leaves have been discovered in Chinese tombs dating back to this period. But for centuries, it remained an exclusive product of the East. The Portuguese princess who changed everything. The true global transformation of tea began not in the tea gardens of China, but in the royal courts of Europe. And it began with a single, almost unbelievable detail. In 1662, a Portuguese princess named Catherine of Braganza arrived in England to marry King Charles II. Catherine was Portuguese nobility. And in Portugal, due to their trade connections with the Far East, tea was already a fashionable drink. The story goes that when she first arrived at the port of Portsmouth, she was offered a traditional English welcome. She asked for a cup of her beloved cha, and her new subjects reportedly offered her a jug of warm beer instead. They didn't know what she was talking about. Catherine, however, was not someone to be swayed by beer. She insisted on drinking her tea in private. But soon, the other noble ladies of the court became curious. The queen's exotic, strange habits soon became the height of fashion. Tea became a symbol of status, refinement, and social superiority. By the 18th century, tea was no longer just a royal indulgence. It had become an integral part of British life. The famous tradition of afternoon tea began, and the demand for this magical Chinese leaf became utterly insatiable. But there was one massive problem. Britain was completely dependent on China for its tea, and China demanded only one form of payment for its precious leaves: pure silver. The Opium Wars, a cup of tea brewed with blood. After the Napoleonic Wars, the British treasury was bleeding silver. They had to find something else to trade to China, something the Chinese would be willing to pay for in silver. They found it in India. The British East India Company began cultivating opium in the Bengal region. They then smuggled this highly addictive drug into China, selling it to Chinese merchants and dealers. The Chinese in turn paid for the opium with silver. The British took that silver and used it to buy Chinese tea. It was a perfect, depraved triangle of trade. But it came at a devastating cost to the Chinese people. When the Chinese discovered the trick, the trade stopped and war broke out. In 1839, the Chinese government, horrified by the explosion of addiction in their country, moved to halt the opium trade. Britain responded with military force. The First Opium War, 1839 to 1842, was a brutal and shockingly one-sided conflict. British warships, equipped with the most advanced military technology of the era, systematically dismantled the Chinese fleets. China was defeated and humiliated. In the resulting Treaty of Nanking, Britain forced China to pay massive reparations, open new trading ports and, most notoriously, cede Hong Kong to the British Crown. But even that wasn't enough. A second Opium War 1856 to 1860 was even more devastating for China. Britain's superior military power resulted in defeat and humiliation for China, the imposition of large reparation costs, and the forced creation of more trading ports. The wars were a brutal, shocking example of what one historian calls a little opium, sweet words and cheap guns. A simple desire for tea had led to the creation of one of the largest narcotics trafficking operations in history, the brutal humiliation of an ancient empire, and the birth of a global power. Stealing the sacred leaf. After the wars, the British realized another uncomfortable truth. China still controlled the tea supply. If the trade was disrupted again, they would be in trouble. The solution was audacious. They would steal the tea plant itself. The East India Company dispatched botanists and spies to smuggle tea plants and seeds out of China. They also discovered that related tea plants already grew wild in the Assam region of northeastern India. In the 1830s, the British established experimental tea gardens in India, particularly in Assam and Darjeeling. With the expertise of Indian laborers and vast tracts of land seized from local people, they created enormous, mechanized plantations. Within a few decades, India and Sri Lanka, then known as Ceylon, became the world's largest producers of tea. The shift was dramatic. It broke China's monopoly on tea, slashed prices, and allowed Britain to control the entire supply chain, from the colonial garden to the imperial cup. The British-style black tea quickly replaced the more delicate green teas that the Chinese had favored. The tea that spawned an empire. Back in Britain, tea was experiencing a golden age. In 1657, the first tea was advertised for sale in London. By the 18th century, tea had become the backbone of the British economy. The East India Company, which held a government-granted monopoly on the tea trade, became the most powerful corporation the world had ever seen. It could raise armies. It could wage wars. It could mint its own money. At its peak, the East India Company had an army of over 200,000 soldiers, larger than the official British Army itself. The company's influence stretched from India to China, and its thirst for profit reshaped the global economy. But tea wasn't just building the British Empire. It was also helping to tear it down. In the American colonies, tea was a deeply politicized product.
Nothing was thought of but this taxation, and the easiest method of liquidation. They were loyal subjects of George III.
On a cold December night, a group of colonists disguised as Mohawk Indians boarded British ships in Boston Harbor and dumped 342 chests of tea into the water. This was the Boston Tea Party. It was the first spark that helped ignite the American Revolution. Tea goes global. The rapid growth of the transoceanic tea trade in the 19th century, combined with British imperial ambitions, led to the establishment of tea monocultures across the globe. The British planted tea in India, Sri Lanka, and eventually in African nations like Kenya and Malawi. Today, the global tea market is worth tens of billions of dollars annually. But while consumers in the West enjoy their affordable tea, the brutal truth of the industry's supply chain remains deliberately hidden. The bitter aftertaste, a legacy of exploitation. Tea is now grown in 62 countries and is second only to water as the most consumed beverage. But the story of tea is also a story of human exploitation that continues to this day, and it's far uglier than most people want to admit. Recent investigations have exposed that the certification schemes meant to ensure ethical practices on tea estates are deeply, systemically flawed. On plantations in Sri Lanka, workers told reporters they were forced to work in fields with no access to toilets or clean drinking water. We do not have enough money to pay our loans. It's not enough to feed the children either. We eat one meal a day, but the rest of the time we starve. One 12-year-old girl who had dropped out of school to work said, "Sometimes we cry because there is no food and we're starving." The system of certification from groups like Rainforest Alliance and Fairtrade is supposed to guarantee that tea workers are paid a fair wage and have safe working conditions. But an investigation found children working on certified estates, dilapidated housing, and no access to clean water. The system isn't broken. It's working exactly as designed for the people at the top. One activist put it bluntly, ethical standards are really a marketing tool. The workers themselves don't know the tea is being sold on the basis of the certification standards. The future of tea. Today we drink tea without thinking about the 5,000-year journey that put it in our hands. From an ancient accident that became a sacred ritual, to the fuel of a global empire, to the central figure of the world's most brutal wars, and finally to the humble tea bag. The next time you take a sip, remember, you are tasting a leaf that has built empires, toppled regimes, and created a global economy that millions of people are still fighting and dying to survive in. If you made it this far, do me a favor and hit subscribe so you don't miss the next deep dive. Drop a comment and tell me your favorite type of tea, because honestly I'm curious, and I will see you in the next one.